with the design system team of one, being you mostly, how do you create guidelines that other designers can consume for a specific component when they're designing in their different projects?
Some guidelines I create, they're more for myself to think about, and then I'll bring designers in. So data table guidelines were a good example of that. I'm sort of building out like a design system, design brief for data tables, thinking about like the goals of a data tables, when should I use one? So from there, we started thinking about, okay, what are like the core needs of a data table? So there's like how to build the component. How can I make this component in a way that's really easy to build? That was like something that I just put on myself. I want designers to be able to consume this easily. This is like more for me, thinking about how to structure this in Figma.
I'm going to share a reality. I have a lot of designer friends that work in startups, high growth companies, and they tell me, Jay, we love design systems. We want to contribute to design systems, but we don't have a dedicated set of engineers who can support that. We don't have a dedicated set of people for design systems. So, do you think, Andrea, that all hope is lost? Do you have a set of dedicated 10 to 20 engineers and designers that design systems at Lattice?
No, we don't. We do not. Our team is small but mighty. Today it's one designer, one PM, one EM, and two engineers. And you could say one engineer because kind of, yeah, it's very small.
Okay. Design Patterns Club. What's that?
Yes. Yeah. So design systems the team didn't exist. It spun up this year. So we didn't have a design systems team, but there was one in the past. The team spun down. So we had different priorities and resource. And so, but didn't want the system to go stale. And so we wanted to continue evolving on the design system. And Cap and I met, and had this idea of starting this design pattern club. And so just as a way to continue iterating on the system, looking at problem areas with the system, and just overall evolving it. And we really wanted to create a space for designers to contribute to that system. And so there wasn't just like one person working off on the side in addition to their project work. So we did that. Cap made it happen. We got designers together, and then I eventually took that over and facilitated these design pattern club meetings. And I think it was like bi-weekly, a bunch of designers, we got together, we came up with a list of projects of areas in the design system that we wanted to work on, things we were thinking about. And this was designers from different product areas. So we're all using components in different ways. And we're learning about all these different problem areas, things like banners aren't working in this area. There's even things like spot colors in here. We're looking at tokens, overlays, side panels, like our avatars. The list goes on. When we had initially launched this, we had no engineering resources. So that's sort of the biggest challenge with this. We had designers coming together. We were pairing up and working on different problems asynchronously. We'd come and meet bi-weekly, and sometimes even in between there, just to share what we're working on, and get feedback on those problems. And then we get these really great updates to our system in a good state, or new components or something that everyone could consume. But we did that, but we didn't have engineering resources. Do we use these in our designs? Like the side nav update we did. And so what we did is we started using these updates in our designs, but would frame to our engineers like, this is the new version, but they'll use the old version, right? And we'd kind of do a side by side, but this would get more eyes on the work we were doing, which was really great. Because then people would start asking questions like, this is really cool. This is working really well in the existing version. Eventually, when the design system spun back up this year, that stepper nav was one of the projects that came out of Design Pattern Club. We knew there were a lot of problems with our existing one. It actually wasn't a component. We had a ton of variations of that. It was one of the first projects we picked up. and it's now in our system and it's being consumed by teams already and proving to have a lot of value. So that was really neat. But yeah, even absent of engineers, we were able to go in and do a lot of great work. And then when we spun back up, we did have the resourcing and we had projects ready to go. That was a lot of fun. We also had started like filtering, and data tables was another project as well.
I love this. I actually want to take a sneak peek into one of the documents where all the designers were coming together and dropping the inconsistent patterns or stuff that could be improved. I think that's what you have in the background, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this was that stepper nav, full screen experience project. We were just pulling together, like we'll go through, and designers will come in and Slack and we're like, we talk about some of our components where they're not working. Hey, this isn't working for me. Why is this way? And we're looking at all these different. So you'll notice in here, we're pulling in screenshots. This left side over here, this is all this wasn't a component, but we're all doing the same thing in different ways, different areas of the
Oh
product.
my God, there's 4 different versions I
With
see of the side nav.
this is the new one, but we're going through. Designers will get together. This was just a quick working session. We're framing stickies as questions. We're just calling out things in the UI, not only about the stepper nav, but about the header as well. Like you'll notice this is center aligned. There's like help triggers, CTAs in different places, things that, you would expect to be consistent but aren't. And it's those details that sort of help users navigate your product and understand how to use it.
Question there. Why do you think like something like this happens? Why do you think there's so many different versions of the side nav within the design team being used? Is it because not everyone is using the same component for side nav? Or is it just that maybe someone else used a different version and it was already in production? They couldn't change it.
Yeah. So this was a case where we didn't have a component. A lot of times when there isn't a component, it's going through and seeing like there's slight similarities you'll notice. And looking at are we doing a similar job somewhere else in Lattice? And can we take something from that and apply it to what we're doing here? So I think in some cases we did that, but in other cases, sometimes it's just quicker to build your own thing if and just to move on that. And sometimes that happened. Um, but yeah, they're not like super far off, but there are like definitely UI details that a designer will notice right away.
So I get that. Like there's no component for it. Different designers will have their different take on it. But by running the Design Patterns Club, you notice that there's a need for the side navigation to be a component to ensure consistency across Lattice. So now you've documented, you've done this audit where you know what are the different versions of this side nav. But now you want to create a component for it for your design system at Lattice. What do you do after this? Do you just go off in a silo and then create a component and share it with everyone? Or maybe there's a different process?
I think so for this one, it's really understanding the needs of different product areas, the problems we're solving for with the side nav. Like, why is this one cards? What do these cards mean? I don't have like a good grasp to go and take this on my own and understand all the problems we're solving for. So it's really bringing those designers from those product areas along the way and doing user interviews with them and going through and talking to them one on one, understanding how to use the side nav. And so the group and design pattern club that was working on this, I think it was Carrie and Kristen, and there was like 4 of us working on this project together. And we're bringing other designers you'll see in here, but really understanding all the different use cases and how we can create a solution that works for hopefully all of them. And this will continue to evolve. We're learning new use cases today and how we can evolve this today. So yeah, that process is still going. We're not quite getting in the pixels yet. I mean, we have a good idea of where to start, but we're definitely iterating on it and stress testing it with teams. We'll go in, plug and play this in different areas. I remember one thing that came out of this was we didn't have these like sections. And so for this use case, there was a need for different sections in the side nav. So that was something we iterated on in the side nav. And then, yeah, it was really like stress testing, designing, stress testing, learning about use cases.
Can you show me an example where during stress testing you found that maybe the pattern breaks and there's something you need to do differently? Was there any example that you came across?
So when we were working on ComCycle and thinking about the stepper nav, so let me go over to the actual component itself. So we have the stepper nav. You have like your primary steps and your secondary steps, and it's a linear flow. And so when we were going back to comp cycles and looking at this flow, you can go back in the flow. And if you change something, you have to continue in a linear way. So you can't go back. Say I go back to select employees on the screen and change something here. I can't get back to budget. It's now disabled. So you have to go through all the steps again. Is that another problem the product area can solve for? But what can we do in the system to make these states clear for those use cases? Because there's like those different nuances that product teams can solve for, but what can the system help solve for? And so we're thinking about like we have indicating disabled, incomplete. A user can't click on this like primary steps because they haven't done this previous thing. We're using tooltips. Yeah, so we're really thinking about state design here and making it clear to users when they can go to certain steps and when they're disabled, and also making this accessible. We used gray text, gray background. There was a lot of nuance here on how we could make this work. And we're still iterating on this, but this is out there being consumed and it's working really well, tested really well too.
And then what is like the most recent side nav design that you have? I know it's a work in progress, but compared to the one we saw earlier, what is the improved version we've got going on now?
This is the what we have today. So this is the like most recent version of that side nav with the different variations. Like this is kind of that comp cycle example that's outlining if I go back, I can't go here, but I can go here because the step is complete. And then there's hover states on there to help give that indication to users on what they can do with this side nav and how they can interact with it.
Makes sense. With the design system team of one being you mostly, how do you create guidelines that other designers can consume for a specific component when they're designing in their different projects?
Some guidelines I create, they're more for myself to think about, and then I'll bring designers in. So data table guidelines were a good example of that. I'm sort of building out like a design system, design brief for data tables, thinking about like the goals of a data tables. When should I use one? And this spawned another discussion of when should I use a list versus when should I use a data table. That's been really fun to have in Design Pattern Club. That was a very long and fruitful conversation that we're still continuing to have. So from there, we started thinking about, okay, what are like the core needs of a data table? So things like there's like how to build the component. How can I make this component in a way that's really easy to build? That was like something that I just put on myself. I want designers to be able to consume this easily. And so they can focus on the actual problem they're trying to solve for. So this is like more for me thinking about how to structure this in Figma. We're looking at needs and I'm starting to build out like usage and guidelines in the file itself. This is not only for designers, but for engineers that they're using when they're building this component. And then again, I'm taking this to designers, having them read through this and test out the component, seeing if it works in their product area for what they're currently doing. Because if I hear like a designer once is going to leverage bulk actions, it's like, okay, let's go stress test that in your product. What's working, what's not? What questions do we have? We're thinking about things like content as well in space. Yeah, we went through several iterations of where bulk actions live, things like that. And so this was the final design, but we had gone through, yeah, different iterations of bulk selection. Like you'll see here, the bar stretches all the way across. It's covering the table headers. We brought this to designers and they're like, my users need to see this table header because this isn't making sense. I don't know what this column is. And so that prompted us to change the layout. Things like that we're going through and we're really poking holes in the UI and designing this together and creating those guidelines. And I'll put them in this Notion and then they'll eventually move over to our reference site. This is sort of like my draft area. Thinking about things like, yeah, header guidelines. We have primary headers, subheaders, documenting those things out. This is like that draft space again, and then we'll move that over to our reference site.
This is so comprehensive design documentation for any components I've ever seen. The question is, why not just skip all this and just share a component library in Figma with just different variations and examples, and that's it, and be done with it?
Oh, we could do that. We can do that. It works. Like one thing with that, without the guidelines, you can really use the component any way you want. This really helps keep the component usage consistent and still flexible. Like when we have a Slack channel, it's called Design Throw Up, where designers will throw in what they're working on and ask questions or share how they're using a data table, maybe something they haven't seen before, and that will prompt more discussion. Let's iterate on our data table cell types. Let's iterate on the data table. So yeah, we're always iterating on our components in Figma, and then we'll look at, okay, do we need to get this in the system? Is this a need? When we start to see 3+ designers asking for something or solving for the same the same problem or doing something similar, we'll start to think about, okay, maybe we should start considering getting this in the system. It's sort of ad hoc.
Got it.
So user sets is more of a design pattern. You could also say it's a product in Lattice, but other teams consume this. And when I was building this, there's several different use cases. And so took like the most common use cases and laid out how a designer might use user sets in different product areas. These are very like loose. You could say this is a guideline, but this is me just working with that designer and really taking a stab at how we might implement this flow in other areas of the product. So you'll see like it's a modal here. You're just coming from different places.
Oh, I love this. It's like different versions of that component.
Yeah, being used different ways. And so this again this whole file came to be with doing user interviews with designers and learning about, we knew there was a need for user sets. So we did that project, but also when I was designing this project, it needs to work for everyone. This area is the actual project, but okay, how can designers implement this in different ways based on their use cases? And then we were laying these flows out together. Yeah, and I have a scratch file of how we got here. This is like the cleaned up file designers can reference. And then there's a whole, again, design guidelines for what a user set is, how to implement user sets in different ways, like the user set component in Figma. Yeah, what's included in the user set component, what it isn't, different views, all the things. And then we're even getting into content.
I think now I'm getting a hang of how you're able to really understand every other designer's needs for a specific component at Lattice, because you work with them in this flow in the background, which you have, which is like all these different use cases you've mapped out. Is you're like working with the designer to also understand for yourself, like this is how they're going to use the component in different use cases. You're stress testing it in a way almost. Like when I look at the titles of all those flows, one is like inline, then it's like compact with components. It's just like different variations of that component or how it could be used. And now, if you do this for every single designer for this specific component in their different project streams, I think you get a very comprehensive idea of how this one component can hopefully solve the needs of all the different projects and designers.
Yeah, and this is really like a starting point. We've iterated on this since, but I haven't maintained this. This is more of like designers will come in here or review the guidelines and then we'll just hop on a call and jam on how to implement user sets in a way that works for them, but that's consistent with other areas of the product.
Hey, this is Jay. It means the world to me that you watched this video. If you want to unlock the AI design and growth design interviews with designers at some of the top companies in the world, then head on over to sneakpeek.design and subscribe to the newsletter.